Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, communication, and especially how women can take a place have their voices heard in places of power. Before we get to my wonderful guest today, I'd like to invite you to see how your presentation skills are doing by going to speakforresultsquiz.com. That's our free 4-minute assessment where you can see where your skills are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today, I'm so proud I managed to get Connolly Taaffe. Ellen has written a wonderful book called The Mirrored Door, and we'll talk about that. But let me read you her bio, and this is only part of her bio. The whole thing is long. It's quite something. Connolly Taaffe is a clinical associate professor at the Kellogg School of Management, which is at Northwestern University. She teaches personal leadership insights, and she's the director and I think the founder of the Women's Leadership Programming. Ellen designs and delivers the Kellogg's Women's Leadership Seminar Series, which is the signature program for female students across Kellogg's MBA program, whether they be full-time, evening and weekend, or executive MBA students. Outside of the school, Ellen serves as an independent board director for 2 public and 1 private company boards, where she's a lead director, vice chair. She works with nominating and governance and compensation, all of which is very important within the board. So this is very high level, getting women's voices into places of power. She also runs a leadership advisory consulting, speaking, and coaching business, and she's a TEDx speaker. She's been published in media such as Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Business Insider, Washington Post, Bloomberg, Kellogg Insight, and many more. Before she started her academic governance and coaching career, Ellen spent 25 years with Fortune 500 companies, such as PepsiCo, Royal Caribbean, and Whirlpool Corporation. In her book, The Mirrored Door, Break Through the Hidden Barrier That Locks Successful Women in Place, Ellen uses her vast experience to help women understand and navigate through the internal and external obstacles to create the future career that they desire. I'm so glad I managed to get her on the podcast. Here's the interview with Connolly Taaffe. Connolly Taaffe, I'm so happy, my friend, that we actually got you on the podcast. Yay. We are kicking off 2024 with this podcast. So this is, if you're listening to it when it first drops, this is why I really wanted to have you on the show, because your topic is exactly what I talk about all the time. And you had such a very interesting take on the challenge of the mirrored door. But before I get into that, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you could interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
First of all, Elizabeth, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. We finally get to have our conversation. I think that I would love to interview Ruth Bader Ginsburg and I think I would ask her what surprised her about her journey through having such a powerful impact on the roles and the rights for women,
Mhm.
and what she thinks now, looking down on what's happened since her passing.
Wow. Okay. Wonderful. Who should be listening?
Who should be listening? Every woman and man,
Everybody.
regardless, everyone should be listening. Uh, she was so powerful and impactful, and a real inspiration.
Great. Great. I'm a big fan of hers. And because of all my years in the opera, because she loved opera, I have many friends who sang at Washington Opera and then she would marry them. That was one of the very cool things. And I was always so jealous. It's like, oh, I wish I could have been there. So asking you, you've written this wonderful book called The Mirrored Door, and I've read it. It's very clear. I love I love what we get nowadays in books, instructional books, that have tips and points at the end. So, it sums it up, which is a great thing. You don't have to wade through and mark it with a highlighter, which I used to do to my textbooks in college. Um, why did you write the book? Uh, where did the concept of the door come from? The mirrored door?
Sure. Well, I I had a business career, worked for big companies, and then I joined Kellogg where I was teaching leadership, a leadership course, and then also running the women's leadership program. And so I was learning how to do that late in my career. And in one of the my first year, I was at an orientation and I saw a female CEO share her story and open it up for questions. And all the hands that were raised that day were from the men in the room.
Ah,
And this was like a beautiful auditorium with hundreds of students in there, and probably 40%, a third to 40% were women. So it wasn't that it was just a few, but it took me back to my own MBA orientation where I didn't raise my hand and neither did the other women in the room. And I was kind of dumbfounded of like, wait, I thought it would be different with all the advantages and the more numbers that we see in organizations. And as I got to know the students more and delved into the research, I saw like so many different pieces of research where women were holding back and they were reflecting inward. My definition of the mirrored door is really this moment that many women face where we reflect inward and hold back, thinking we're not ready or we're not worthy to move forward into action. And so it really came from, like, this distorted reflection that I certainly see in myself. I do this
mhm.
and have done it, and while I've gotten better at it, it still stays with me, but I really saw it in my students, and then I saw it validated in all this research. And so that, with a great, coach who was helping me write a speech, actually, my TEDx talk,
Mhm.
I was going on and on about this thing that I was seeing, and I was like, "It's like a mirror, and it's as if it's a door that we're locked out of. It's like a mirrored door." And, this was in my word salad of talking.
Uh-huh.
She came back to me, her name is AJ Harper, and said, "Tell me, you said mirrored door, describe that."
Mhm.
And so that was kind of the moment of coming up with the metaphor.
And this is one of those doors that we put up in front of ourselves and actually isn't locked. It's just that we tell ourselves we can't go through it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
and certainly where we might be locked out from other biases or systemic issues, there's a ton of that we face.
Yes.
But this is something in our control that we might just be locking ourselves in. And as you said, it is a door. It is unlocked. We just got to go through it. We got to summon our courage to go through it.
Yeah. I'm curious, before I get into more details on this, are there generational differences? So most of the people that I work with are senior executives or executives who should be at C-level or VP level, but, are stuck. I do the same thing, getting them past the glass ceiling, but you work with younger, uh, sort of 20 somethings, right? 30 somethings?
Um, I teach most of the full-time or evening weekend MBA students are in their late 20s. The executive MBA women are in their 40s and some are in their 50s. And that's I coach a little bit outside of work too, and it's generally similar to your audience
Uh-huh.
as well. So I mean, generationally, I think we want a lot of the same things. I think the younger you are, the more you think you can get that
Mhm.
and maybe, are more likely to expect that. Whereas I think, I'm older than you, I'm assuming, but I think the older you are, you kind of are like, "This is what it is, and I have to
Mhm.
deal with it." I think that the younger generation, they really were told you can have it all, and they excelled academically and then get out and see, wow, no one told me it would be this hard. Whereas I think we thought it was going to be hard. There were fewer numbers. And so
Uh-huh.
so I think there's for a lot of women in their 20s and 30s, it's like, wow, I didn't understand that it would be like this. And that's a part of the book and what we're doing to sort of share with women, how they can navigate this. So I think that's true. I also think I start to see the pressure of social media and comparison and perfectionism
Mhm.
is increasing, and studies would say the perfectionism is increasing. So when you think of even like applying to college or MBA school, it's different now. It's much harder now than
Mhm.
it was 30 years ago. And so the pressure, the high stakes, and so like for high achieving women and executives, it's sort of this self expectation. I think is even higher.
Mhm.
So I
I
see
think
that.
some of it is also, that the expectation is higher, and there is for a lot of us, for me particularly, I remember, when I was one of the very few female opera directors in America, being accepted as a woman and fighting my way up, but then not being able to get past the glass ceiling of running a company. That was my lived experience, which is why I teach it because I made so many mistakes. But one of the things that this whole legacy of history of it's a man's world or the men are in charge or maybe the women really are in charge but you have to make the man think he's in charge, things like that. Do you have any thoughts about where that might come from?
Well, I think that it starts early in how the messages that girls receive from family, school, society, media early on is to there's it's about being certain, being perfect, being the good girl, smiling, making sure everyone else is happy, very strong other orientation, and those kinds, and make sure you sort of
Yeah.
fit in with the group. And so I think there is a girl code, early on that is don't stand out in acting superior, whereas boys grow up with a one-upmanship
Yep.
and kind of razz each other, which I think enables them to take feedback later, but
Mhm.
also to take chances. Um,
Yeah.
and take chances with that uncertainty because they learn early on. Well, it might be hard for a little guy growing up to sort of be taunted to do something that's higher risk. They learn over time to take risks and that they
Mhm.
can land on their feet, that they can figure it out. Whereas I think girls are really taught to be certain and, I think attached to school and where there's a rubric, and then they get into the workplace, and it's much more about gray area and taking risks. And
Hmm.
there's not always a clear answer like there is earlier. And I think that's a harder thing. And, you know,
Well, I think also somewhere in there, there's the message that if you make a mistake, it's fatal.
mhm,
Mistake. Girls aren't allowed to make mistakes. Or if you make a mistake, that reflects on all women. That's
for
one of the
sure.
ones that I know. If I did, I am old enough to remember hearing stories from my parents' friends about lady drivers. Oh gosh, you can't have women don't know how to drive a car. And that I think is from the 40s. So 40s and 50s, which was the generation of my parents. But hearing those stories and thinking, oh yeah, we're not allowed to say that anymore. But yeah. Um,
Yeah. I'm less familiar with that one, but to your point, this, well, I think most women would say, I don't necessarily feel like anyone's putting me on a pedestal. I think that there's kind of this embedded view of women do everything right and do the moral thing and all that. So when a woman makes a mistake or does something wrong, the fall is definitely bigger, and we see
yes.
that with in a lot of business situations where the woman pays a bigger price than their counterparts do.
Yeah, that's always we can get into the glass cliff there where
Yes.
if there's an impossible job and then the company says we'll have a woman in there, and I don't think anybody deliberately puts a woman in a position where she's guaranteed to fail. I think that's like a subconscious thing. Is
Mhm.
that well, maybe it's just I'm not going to risk the career of that promising young man I know if it's the men making the decision. Here, let's give a chance to the younger woman, and then if it's an absolutely impossible job, um, that's a whole other episode. Maybe we talk about just the glass cliff, you and I, another time. As you are, we were talking a little bit about upbringing and cultural expectations. That's also part of it. I'd like to move on to the question of why then do women struggle for self-promotion? And this again is something that I have noticed that I am a presentation skills trainer. I'm a public speaker. I work with public speakers. I help ex, you know, very smart, interesting people like you get out there and speak. When I talk to conference organizers, I say, why do you have 95% men? And very often the answer around the world is we'd love to have more women. But the women don't raise their hands. So the women say, "Oh, I'm not ready yet." Can you address that?
I think that, something you said earlier, you mentioned it's not intended, but it's subconscious. I
Mhm.
think that all of that, those early messages, both that girls have and bring into as they become women, and men have too, is this expectation of being other oriented and don't have too big of an ego.
Yeah.
Whereas that
Mhm.
I think is more accepted in guys. We almost expect it.
Yeah.
And women being self-effacing or like, "Elizabeth, I love your jacket." "Oh, no, oh, this whole thing?"
Yeah.
Like our language even in accepting,
Part of the
uh,
girl code. Yes.
girl code and discounting ourselves. And then I think that, like, for example, in my family, very much a rule of, a view of don't be a braggart.
Yes.
And I think that could be a familial thing, but I also think it's particularly the penalty for women bragging is
Yes.
higher. And we're not so, it's something we learn that could hurt us in relationships.
Mhm.
then we get into the workplace and, we're not self-promoting or advocating for ourselves. And believe me, from managing so many people over a 30-year career, the men are coming in asking for the job, the corner office, the big project, everything, before they're ready.
Mhm.
And so we learn that it feels uncomfortable. We don't get used to it, and we really have to shift from the negative sides of self-promotion into this is normal career planning that is very collaborative. And if our bosses don't know what we want or what we have accomplished, they're not able to do their job or advocate for us either. So it's a real mindset shift, but it's helpful to sort of think back to like what messages we have about self promotion.
There's, I talk often about, did you ask or did you just hint? Because
I love that.
girls, I was trained to not ask directly because it's selfish.
Yes.
Don't make the direct ask. Mention that you would like to have something done, and then hopefully someone will say, "Cool, okay, I'll do that," which actually rarely works. That was one of the difficult lessons I had to learn as a boss when I founded an opera company, and I realized, and finally my assistant said, "Just tell me." Yes. Also, she was Austrian, so she had like the Austrian German way of speaking, which is don't use all these extra words, just say it.
Correct. Yeah.
But she said, it's so much easier if you just tell me directly what you want. And I went, oh, wow. That had it just blew my mind. And I realized, oh, I would, now I apologize to all the people before that to whom I was really unclear because I was hinting rather than asking.
Yeah.
And
And that's what people want. Yeah. So in the book, I have these 5 strategies that make us successful, but also can become perilous. And this is one of them, that I call patiently performing. And it's as if we think if we have to ask for it, it's just not as good. And we're just kind of missing out. But, for a while, it works for us as bosses. We're not the squeaky wheel. That's a good thing for a boss for a while. But after a while, we could get really frustrated as people pass us by.
yeah, yes, exactly. So talk to us about this framework because I love this part. So I was reading through all the earlier chapters talking about the mistake, saying, yes, I made that mistake. I made that mistake. And then I got to the chapters and what do you do about it? I said, hallelujah. Okay, what do I do about it? So tell
Yeah.
us.
So with this, you mean specifically in patiently performing, right?
Well, tell me what the the 4-part framework is.
Okay. So in patiently performing, I have a framework called SIGN,
Mhm.
named that way because we have to signal, we have to give a sign to others of what we want. And it's a way to think through the important conversations you need to have, or a person needs to have, particularly with their boss, who is likely the person who's going to be putting forth, something that advocates for you. And the first one, the S stands for stake, and it's getting in touch with what's at stake for you in your career. What can you gain or what could you lose by staying in this, patiently performing mode.
Mhm.
So it's like, what's your why here? And it might be I want to be a CMO one day, or I want to be able to send my kids to college, or I want a career here. I want to stay here. Whatever that is for you, getting in touch with that. And then I is the intention. And this is all about preparing yourself for a meeting to talk about this. So it's like my intention is I want to be whatever that is. I want to be crystal clear on my goals, or I want to, even though this is hard for me, I want to be courageous in this moment. So it's kind of a way of what's the mindset that I want to have when I go into this meeting, and how do I want to show up? Uh,
Mhm.
the G is what are my goals? And this is really a focus on the short-term goal of in this meeting, you know, I want to share what I've accomplished over the last year and get feedback on how I'm tracking.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be, there's a longer term goal of like, I want whatever it is you want. But for the moment, for this meeting, because you're going to have multiple conversations, or you
Mm-hmm.
should. And so, what's the short term goal? So, it could be as easy as I just want to flag my ambitions, because a lot of times we could be seen as, if we don't speak up, we could be seen as less ambitious than we really are. But we have
Yes.
this rule of I just can't ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that being really clear on what is the goal of this interaction with my boss or whoever the person is that I'm meeting. And then N is really the negotiables. And this is, what do I want to walk away with? So, for example, if I asked, my goal was to understand, I get feedback on my eligibility or timing for a promotion. Negotiables could be what's the timing, but it could be like a project that you want. I think we think of the things we negotiate for our compensation.
Uh-huh.
It's also what projects I get, what kind of training. Can I go to Elizabeth's course on Speaker Who Gets Results? Can I get a mentor? Like, what are the things that will help you get to your goal, your longer
Mm-hmm.
term goal? And so it's about, I'd like to be able to do this. And so it's a negotiation too. So that's what sign is: stakes, intention, goals, and negotiables.
Uh,
And there's a write up. I mean, it's a whole
yeah,
chapter.
yeah. But actually, I would add an S, which is then speak up.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've often thought about, I often approach communication as language, because I was trained to work in multiple languages, and I have often had to give presentations in not my first language. What I find is, in terms of sometimes called men's language and women's language, I think of it as single-focused, individualistic people, which are often women in corporate careers, because you have to be that way to rise in the structure that was built for single-focused people. And then the multi-focused people, traditionally women, but not always, who see the world in a web of relationships. So if we grow up as girls in being taught to see the world in a web of relationships, then that's where it's important to fit in.
Mhm.
And I should ask some of my Japanese friends if they find that. So the Japanese men that I know, to say it's important to fit in, but then how's your ambition within that? Now that I'm thinking about it, but if you think of it as a relational thinkers, then the importance of fitting in is easy to understand.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have run across that.
I see it in two different ways. I think it is prioritizing others,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good thing. We need more of that
Yeah.
in our world. It's when it becomes too uneven and our own needs and who we are don't aren't part of the equation. And so I'm relating it to two of these strategies that become perilous. And one is eager to please, which is all about being other oriented, and we have to also take care of ourselves, set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one is the all about fitting in, and it's more of when we trade off our authenticity, or we are so other oriented where we fit in, and then we're 6 months or a year into a company and think, I haven't really shown my real self. Did they really hire the real
Uh-huh.
person? And all of that. So I think it's finding this balance, but I agree with you that I think it's they are connected. So I like how you have connected those things, and we just have to figure out what are the benefits of doing that, but also what are the costs to us? And I think the
Yes.
cost in that combination is our authenticity, or like, what about me? What about the needs? Um, and sometimes I think that the more we can take our other orientation, and it doesn't mean we have to always go with that, but maybe sometimes the bigger way to take care of others is by being straightforward, is by also having a balance in the relationship too. But it's so interesting, the relational thing that you bring up.
I'm wondering, I'll just go back to the individualistic and relational is a term from couples counseling. So I learned about this from a woman who's a marriage counselor, and I went, bingo.
Yeah.
But she's given me permission to use her material because she doesn't work in business. So lucky me.
Very good.
I'd like to, Ellen Taaffe, it's been so wonderful to have you here. I'd like to have you leave us with one thought out of all the many things that you've said. And it's a great book. Go get this book. It's a great book. How can we find the balance between standing in our authenticity and yet not erasing ourselves from the picture?
I think my final thought would be about tapping into courage. I think in a world where on every female-oriented conference or podcast or article, it's all about finding confidence. And I think confidence is the outcome. And we need the courage to stand up for whatever, how we want to stand out or stand up or set boundaries and balance out that other relational orientation by having the courage to do that. And so often when we have strong relationships, they can withstand our disagreement or saying no or setting a boundary. But we have to have the courage to open the mirror door to move forward into action. And I think it's all about courage.
I love that. I love that. Ellen Connolly Taaffe, I'm so glad we made this happen, my friend. I'm so glad to have you this, and I definitely want to, let's keep this conversation going, and we'll keep talking about that. And one of these days I'm going to show up at your doorstep and say, hey, let's keep talking about this.
Yeah, sounds good. There's so many things that we could, as we talk, there's so many different things like Glass Cliff or other things that we could talk about. Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you, Ellen. You have a wonderful rest of your day. And this has been Speakers Who Get Results. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe wherever you are, whatever app you listen to, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that people track and would help us have more people listen to the amazing Ellen Connolly Taaffe. Thank you, Ellen. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.